Hi, this is Review Deck here. Welcome to the next video. In the opening scene, we are introduced to a woman named Sabina Spielrein, who is suffering from mental instability. She is easily angered and frustrated by the smallest of things. As a result, she is brought to Bergelsli, a renowned psychiatric hospital in Zurich, Switzerland in 1904. It is later revealed that Sabina is diagnosed with a typical case of hysteria and she is going to begin her treatment under the care of a Swiss doctor named Carl Jung. During their first interaction, Dr. Carl positions himself behind Sabina and notices her difficulty in answering questions, characterized by her frequent stammering. The next morning, Carl takes a walk with Sabina in the woods and during this, he discovers that she possesses an extraordinary ability to anticipate people's words before they utter them. When asked about it, Sabina claims that she has an inner angel who communicates with her in German and helps her predict things. Upon hearing this, Dr. Carl suggests that her talent would be valuable for pursuing a career in medicine, just as she dreams of doing. As the two continue talking, Sabina drops her coat on the ground, prompting Dr. Carl to pick it up and dust it off using his walking stick. Surprisingly, this angers Sabina, and she rudely tells him to stop. Several days later, Carl learns that Sabina is actually a well-educated woman with a degree in medicine. Realizing her intellect and vitality, he grants her the opportunity to assist him in his experiments. Sabina cannot believe that she is going to work with such a renowned scientist, so she accepts without any hesitation. The scene then shifts to Carl's wife, Emma, who has recently given birth to a beautiful baby girl. Excited about the same, Carl visits the delivery ward to see his newborn. However, he notices his wife's unhappiness because she had hoped to deliver a male child, as she had promised. In response, Carl consoles Emma, urging her not to entertain such irrational thoughts. Amidst these events, Carl and Sabina continue their talking sessions, during which he unveils the root cause of her condition. He explains that Sabina's problems started when her abusive father humiliated her. He used to punish her on the backside and forced her to kiss his hands. This actually aroused Sabina and she began to seek out any form of humiliation. Even the act of Carl striking her coat with his walking stick earlier had provoked excitement in her. With this significant revelation, Dr. Carl arranges a meeting with Dr. Sigmund Freud, a renowned Austrian physician, in order to discuss their patients and determine the most effective path towards their recovery. As the doctors engage in their conversation, they begin to share their views and analyze one another, leading to a lengthy discussion that stretches on for 13 uninterrupted hours. Despite this, the boys are not tired, and they decide to meet each other very soon. Later, Carl meets Sabina and tells her about his conversation with Dr. Freud. As their conversation unfolds, the two discover their shared interests and become much closer to each other. One day, Dr. Freud has to go on an urgent business trip, so he writes a letter to Carl, requesting him to look after a patient named Dr. Otto Gross, an unstable psychoanalyst known for his brilliance and womanizing tendencies. In the letter, Dr. Freud provides all the details about Otto, including the peculiar fact that he resorts to biting when he becomes angry. For the sake of their friendship, Carl obliges without any hesitation. He then attends a session with Otto, hoping to use his therapeutic talking method to help the patient. During this, Otto reveals his lustful nature, boasting about his numerous mistresses and the children he has fathered with them. He also advises Carl to have extramarital affairs. According to Otto, having multiple partners keeps a person fit and healthy, while having only one causes a headache. On the following day, Sabina actively assists Carl in his research and even cracks a few jokes to keep him fresh. She has actually started recovering from her mental condition. On the other hand, Carl's mind wanders back to Otto's words. He finds himself gazing at Sabina for a while, yet somehow manages to maintain control over his impulses. That evening, Carl has another therapy session with Otto. The latter inquires if he has ever engaged in intimate relationships with his patients. Carl responds negatively and poses the same question to Otto. In response, Otto reveals that he manipulates his patients into thinking that their desire to not have intercourse with him is an illness. He uses this technique on all the women he meets, and it works almost every time. Otto boasts that he has actually had intercourse with more than 100 women. The next morning, Carl meets Sabina at a park and they begin talking about intercourse. Sabina reveals that she has no sexual experience, suggesting that this may be a contributing factor to her feelings of depression and anxiety. Hence, she would like to gain such an experience right away. When the doctor hesitates, Sabina takes the initiative and kisses him unexpectedly. She then invites Carl to her place later that evening so that they can have passionate intercourse. Later, during the therapy session, Otto urges Carl to give in and perform erotic acts on Sabina. Since she wants it, he should give it to her. However, Carl remains resolute in his decision. He doesn't want to betray his wife and also acknowledges the taboo of becoming involved with a patient. But as the persuasive Otto continues narrating some of his romantic encounters, Carl's resolve starts weakening. He eventually succumbs to his desires when the crazy Otto claps a worker in the open field. Unable to control himself anymore, Carl rushes to Sabina's place and ends up getting intimate with her. This marks the beginning of their affair, and over time, they engage in even more vigorous acts, which include bondage and spanking. One day, Emma surprises Carl with a boat adorned with red sails, knowing it is something he had always wanted. She regards him as the best man in the world and mentions that he deserves everything he desires. Witnessing his wife's love and trust, Carl realizes that he is betraying her. As a result, he visits Sabina at her residence and confesses that they should terminate their affair at once. However, she persuades him to continue their relationship, urging him to punish her, just like the way her father used to do. In the next scene, Dr. Freud returns from the business trip and meets with Carl, resuming their discussions about their respective theories of psychoanalysis. However, they frequently find themselves at odds, leading to a strain in their friendship. As the discussion starts heating up, Freud brings up a rumor that Carl has taken one of his patients as a mistress and is having coitus with her. However, the latter firmly denies the accusation. He claims that he is simply treating the woman with a close eye. After the meeting ends, Carl realizes that he can no longer conceal his affair, so he decides to end his secret relationship with Sabina, leaving her heartbroken and devastated. A few days later, an enraged Sabina storms into Carl's office and accuses him of informing her mother about their affair. She calls him a betrayer and an idiot. However, in response, Carl reveals that her mother was already aware of the relationship due to an anonymous letter she had received. He informs Sabina that he will now only treat her as his patient, disregarding their previous connection. This further infuriates Sabina, leading her to grab a knife and cut Carl's face before storming out. Later on, she writes a letter to Dr. Freud, requesting a meeting to discuss the affair between herself and Carl. After reading her letter, Freud writes a correspondence to Carl to inquire about the truth of the matter, but Carl denies any involvement. He says that Sabina is actually trying to destroy his life by spreading false rumors about him. Due to their close friendship, Freud believes it right away, and he sends a letter to Sabina. In it, he mentions that he cannot meet her at the moment as he is busy with work. Freud also suggests that they resolve their issues without his intervention. Overwhelmed by the circumstances, Sabina visits Carl's office once again, only to discover that he is leaving the hospital. It turns out he is traveling to the United States to take part in a major conference. Enraged, Sabina chastises Carl for lying to Freud about their affair. She demands that he write a letter to Freud, confessing the truth about their relationship. Sabina also reminds Carl that she could have publicly harmed his reputation but chose not to. Hearing all this, Carl ultimately obliges and sends a letter to his Austrian friend, revealing the full extent of the truth. When Freud goes through the letter, he feels betrayed but not shocked. He simply writes a letter to Sabina, offering his apologies and expressing admiration for her way to resolve the conflict. The scene then cuts to a few years later, when Sabina travels to Carl's house in Switzerland in order to collaborate on her dissertation. As they work together, they are reminded of their lustful past where they had intercourse in numerous locations like Carl's bedroom, the mental ward, and even the boat. So, they decide to add another memory to the list by having coitus. Afterwards, Sabina shares her decision to leave Zurich after completing her graduation and relocate to Vienna. This makes Carl emotional and he requests her not to go, but Sabina doesn't change her mind. 2 more years pass, and Sabina, now a qualified psychiatrist, is in Vienna, where she meets with Freud. During their discussion on psychoanalysis, Sabina expresses that she is on Freud's side, but she also emphasizes the importance of coexistence between Freud and Carl for the continued development of psychoanalysis. However, Freud doesn't appear to be interested in reconciling with Carl. They have grown so distant that they don't even want to see each other's faces. A year later, Sabina pays a visit to Emma at her residence. Sabina is now married to a Russian doctor, and she is expecting a child, with the couple expressing a preference for a baby girl. As they engage in conversation, Emma reveals that Carl's mental state has been deteriorating since he ended ties with Freud. As a result, she asks Sabina to talk to him. On the other hand, we see Carl quietly sitting by a peaceful river. It is revealed that he has distanced himself from his research work and is no longer productive. Shortly after, Sabina approaches him and initiates a conversation. Carl reveals that he has been plagued by apocalyptic dreams that prevent him from sleeping. Sometimes, he sees that the entire city is being ravaged by a flood so gigantic that it can destroy the entire world. Sabina finds the conversation boring, so she quickly changes the topic and informs him that she is returning to Russia with her husband. She then inquires about his new mistress, and Carl responds by stating that her name is Tony, and that she bears resemblance to Sabina. He says that Tony reminds him of the good times he spent with Sabina. Carl further admits that his love for Sabina has contributed to his personal growth, but acknowledges that there is nothing he can do to change the situation. After the conversation, Sabina gets on a carriage and leaves the city while Carl is still lost in his thoughts. In the film's closing remarks, the destinies of the four analysts are disclosed. It is mentioned that Otto tragically died from starvation in Berlin in 1920. Freud, after being forced out of Vienna by the Nazis, passed away from cancer in London in 1939. Sabina, having trained numerous analysts in the Soviet Union, suffered a devastating fate along with her two daughters, as they were shot by the Nazis in 1942. Meanwhile, Carl overcame a nervous breakdown and went on to achieve recognition as the best psychologist in the world before his death in 1961.